The night it happened. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and rain, and I was the kind of tired that makes your bones sound hollow when you breathe. I had learned to keep a smile I could not afford to lose, to move like a metronome coffee pot, order pad. Breathe until a stranger in a charcoal suit stepped through the door with eyes like a lighthouse through fog, and a voice so thin it felt like oxygen at altitude. Before midnight, he'd leave me with a promise I didn't understand, a check that looked like a misprint, and a silence that would call at 8:13 a.m. to say, "He died last night." My name is Claire Moore, 29, and when my boutique catering company drowned under 3 late invoices, 1 greedy landlord, and a storm that turned our kitchen into a waiting pool, my life rearranged itself under fluorescent lighting at the Riverside Diner off Highway 41. The neon sign out front jittered the word open like it needed CPR. Truckers paid in cash and night nurses paid in stories, and I paid in smiles and no worries. Darla, our head waitress with lacquered hair and a moral coat of steel, would tap the counter and say, "Sweetheart, drink water, you're pale as chalk." And I'd pretend the math on my rent, my mother's medication, and a storage unit holding the last stainless steel table from Claire & Co. Catering wasn't carving me to the bone. My ex Jason left when I refused to borrow from his crypto pile to relaunch. My sister Avery texted dog videos, and you're not your balance. And Mom, Linda, pretended not to notice when I brought leftovers like contraband hope. Rain strafed the windows that night, and when the bell above the door tinkled, Darla muttered, "Wrong neighborhood," because the man who walked in looked like money that didn't need to brag charcoal coat, cufflinks, a pocket square folded like origami, except his hands gave him away. Steady, unless you stared long enough to notice the tremor. He took booth 5 beneath the buzzing sign, and when I poured hot water and dropped a tea bag like a ritual, he said, "Do you serve Earl Grey?" And I said, "We serve hot and wet, but I can pretend." And he laughed, surprised, grateful, tired. "I'm Ethan Whitmore," he added, like the name might mean something to me. It didn't. But the look on his face did the look of someone who had come for warmth and found witness. He ate like a man who had made a truce with small portions, poached eggs, dry toast, tea, and asked the kind of questions no customer asks. How did you land here? What would you rebuild if you could? His voice made everything sound like confession. And when I said, I ran a catering company, I lost it. Now I carry plates. He smiled gently and said, "People don't eat plates. They eat what you carry to them the celebration." I refilled his tea and asked, "Who did you lose?" And he looked at the steam and said, "My son." And silence leaned into the booth with us like a third person. He paid with a black card, slid a business card into the check holder, and when I lifted the leather, my hand nearly dropped at a cashier's check for $70,000, crisp and absurd under the heat lamp. "I can't take this," I whispered. "You can," he said, not unkind. "Call it payment for good tea and better listening. Promise me one thing. Miss Moore, use it for something alive." My mouth made a promise before my doubt did I promise. He covered my hand, skin cool, and said, "You remind me of someone my son loved." She laughed at my expensive teacups and called them tiny soup bowls. "You laughed at my tea." He left in the rain, and I stood blinking at the check as if it might melt, then folded it into my apron and walked home with the sky baptizing my cheap shoes. I didn't sleep. Numbers jittered against the dark until my phone rang at 8:13 a.m., and a precise voice said, "Miss Moore, this is Harper Quinn, counsel to Mr. Ethan Whitmore. I'm afraid I have difficult news. He died last night." I gripped my counter while the room emptied out. "He amended his estate late yesterday and named you. Could you come to our office at 11 a.m.? Darla pressed her car keys into my palm like a benediction. and downtown rose stainless and unsentimental as an elevator that didn't apologize for its speed, delivered me to Whitmore. Quinn and Pike. They seated me in a conference room upholstered in leather and hush. A woman with a silver pin that read Harper Quinn slid a heavy envelope across the table, while a man in a navy suit, Randall Pike, the smile of a person who had read every loophole, watched me like I might stain the furniture. Mr. Whitmore executed a codicil at 6:41 p.m., Harper said, voice orderly and careful, effective upon death. He left the bulk of his estate valued for probate at approximately $2 billion to you. The floor tilted. The skyline beyond the glass swam. Somewhere in the distance, rain ticked the city awake as I stared at the envelope and felt the shape of my life change in a single exhale. This must be a mistake, I managed, gripping the armrest like it could steady the world. Randall's tone was oil over water. Mr. Whitmore was competent, he said, but our shareholders may have concerns. A waitress inheriting a controlling stake complicated optics. Harper's sharp glance cut him in half. We honor the will, she said firmly, and opened the envelope. Inside, a handwritten letter waited like a heartbeat. Mr. Whitmore also left this, she said, unfolding it. The first words looked almost shy on the page. Claire, I met you far too late. If you're hearing this, I've kept a promise to a version of myself who still believed in mercy. Once my son loved a girl who laughed like you. Once I made that girl feel small, then I lost them both. One to death, one to grief. You remind me of the life I could have had if I'd forgiven faster. Tears blurred the ink. Why me, I whispered. Harper hesitated, then said, There's one more paragraph. Randall looked away, suddenly fascinated by the skyline. Harper continued, her voice barely above the hum of the air vents. This is the reason. Claire, I learned yesterday that the hit and run that killed my son 32 years ago, the one that stole my future, involved your mother. The air left my lungs in pieces. She was young. She panicked. She was not alone. I could not forgive the driver. I will try to forgive the child. The words fell like glass. No, I said. That's impossible. Harper's professionalism cracked just enough to sound human. There's corroboration, she said softly. A vintage blue Camaro, police reports, a local councilman who intervened. The car was traced to your mother's boyfriend, Daryl Keene. Your mother, Linda Moore, was 19. 19. My mother at 19 was the girl in faded Polaroids, hair in a scarf, eyes like summer, hands that packed my lunches and counted grocery change. Is my mother going to prison, I asked, already knowing the answer was too big for laws. Criminal exposure after this long is unlikely, Harper said gently. Mr. Whitmore didn't seek charges. He sought an end. She read on, voice trembling only once. If you accept the estate, you accept the condition to establish the Whitmore Second Chances Trust, with a minimum of $1.5 billion to support victims of preventable tragedies and to fund driver education, addiction treatment, and restorative justice. You must tell the truth to your mother, and to me if I am gone. Release my family from vengeance. Release yours from secrecy. I could only stare at the window, watching cars crawl below like seconds I couldn't rewind. What if I say no, I asked. Then it passes to charity, Harper said. Mr. Whitmore anticipated your refusal. By the time I left the office, the city had gone back to pretending nothing extraordinary ever happened, but I couldn't breathe in that lie. I drove to my mother's apartment, knuckles white around Darla's steering wheel. She was sitting at the kitchen table stitching the shoulder of my thrift store blazer. She looked up, smiled, and froze. What is it, she asked, already bracing. I stood there with the kind of truth that didn't fit in a mouth. Who was Daryl Keene? Her hand went slack. The needle fell, clinking against the floor. "Why that name?" she whispered. "Because a man died last night," I said, "and left me $2 billion to teach us how to tell the truth." She stared. Breath shallow. "Oh, God," she said. Her eyes weren't my mother's, then they were 19 again, cornered by headlights and rain. "Tell me," I whispered. She began to talk, voice thin with memory. "We were kids. Daryl had a car and a mean laugh. He drank to feel bigger. I told him not to drive. He told me to shut up. It was raining. He cut a corner. There was a light, a flash, a motorcycle. He swerved. It went down. Her breath broke. We kept going. You hit someone and didn't stop. I said, tasting metal. He said we'd be safe if we just kept going," she whispered. "He had an uncle who could fix it." The news said Michael Whitmore, 22, heir apparent, killed in a hit and run. Daryl punched the wall. I cleaned the blood. I felt myself splintering into disbelief and recognition. "You hid this from me my whole life." "I hid it from myself," she said, eyes wet. "I built a new person out of work and silence. I married your father. I never drove at night again. Every motorcycle made me sick. When Ethan found out, he must have—" She stopped. "He forgave you," I said quietly. "By proxy. Through me." She reached for my hand. I flinched before I meant to. Her touch hovered between us like a moth that couldn't find the light. "If you want me to turn myself in," she whispered, "I will." "I don't want a courtroom," I said, voice raw. "I just want the truth to stop standing between us." At that moment, the front door flew open and Avery burst in, dripping from the rain. "Okay, what's going on?" "Because it feels like something exploded in here." I looked at her. Then Mom. Then the world that suddenly had no air left. It did. I said. Avery listened in silence, eyes moving between me and Mom, her mouth tightening as if she could chew through the truth. When I finished, she let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "So let me get this straight," she said, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. "We were broke yesterday. Now we're rich. But also radioactive classic Moore family plot twist." I almost smiled, because that was Avery humor used like a life vest. "Ethan left conditions," I said quietly. "A fund, restorative justice, public truth." Mom nodded, grateful for something that sounded like atonement. "Then I'll meet his lawyer," she said. "I'll write to his family. I'll sign whatever makes this less monstrous." Avery folded her arms, eyes still sharp. "What about the vultures?" she asked. "What vultures?" I said, though I already knew. "Everyone who smells money," she replied. "Exes, reporters, cousins twice removed. Oh, and Jason already texted. Heard a rumor. Coffee." She rolled her eyes so hard it hurt to look. My phone buzzed again, and Harper's name filled the screen. "Claire," she said, her voice quick with tension. "A reporter called the office. Someone leaked the codicil. There will be cameras by morning." My stomach dropped. "Who leaked it?" "We can't prove it," she said. "But Mr. Pike has strong opinions about fiduciary duty and about you." "Let him have them," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have a letter." Mom picked up the blazer she'd been mending, slid it over my shoulders like armor, and said softly, "If we're going to be honest, we do it properly. I'll stand next to you." Avery grabbed her keys like a sword. "And we're doing hair and makeup," she said. "The truth looks better when it doesn't look like it cried all night." We laughed through the ache of it. 3 women piecing together a life out of shards. By morning, the diner was ringed with 3 news vans and a man pretending to be a customer while live tweeting my coffee refills. Darla, Queen of Steel and Sass, taped a handwritten sign to the door, "No media. Eat or leave." The internet did both. Harper arranged a press statement at the Whitmore Foundation Hall, sleek, modern, and too clean for the ghosts it held. I dressed in gray. Mom wore the same thrift store blazer. Avery held my hand until the cameras turned on. Behind the podium sat the board of Whitmore Holdings, 5 strangers with pedigrees for middle names, and at their center, Randall Pike, whose tie alone could pay a semester of tuition. "Miss Moore," he began, smoothing invisible dust from his sleeve. "On behalf of our shareholders, condolences, also concern. The market dislikes uncertainty. You represent a variable." "Grief does that," I said, feeling every eye on me. "So does honesty." He smiled with the patience of a man used to winning. "The board has a proposal. You relinquish control of Whitmore Holdings to us. In return, we'll endow your Second Chances Trust with, say, $200 million, a generous settlement cleaner for everyone." Before I could speak, Harper cut in. "The will requires $1.5 billion, non-negotiable." Randall's smile didn't waver. Courts are interpretive. Optics matter. A waitress inheriting billions from a man she served tea well. That's a story with edges. The board can soften them. "And the truth?" I asked. He blinked. "Truth is a luxury when markets are open." I stood, pulse steady now, as if something inside me had finally decided which side of fear to stand on. "Then consider this a hostile act," I said, "by me, against silence." Harper's mouth twitched the faintest smile. "We'll be proceeding as written," she said. Randall leaned back, eyes cold as glass. "Good luck with the storm. Miss Moore." When we walked to the podium, cameras flashed like lightning trying to invent thunder. The room smelled like perfume and calculation. I unfolded Ethan's letter, but I didn't read the numbers. I read the mercy. "Don't let money be your monument," he wrote. "Let it be the bridge back to the people you love." I told the truth about the car, the rain, the 19-year-old girl who couldn't find the brakes on her fear. I told them about Ethan's forgiveness, about how guilt and grace could coexist in the same breath. "We'll fund therapy," I said. "Driver education, restorative justice, scholarships in Michael Whitmore's name." Hands shot up. "Are you a gold digger?" one reporter asked. "Is your mother a murderer?" another shouted. I took a breath and answered both. No, and no. She's a human being who will spend the rest of her life making amends. "Will you sell the company?" someone yelled. "I'll run the trust," I said. "The board will run what they already run with oversight." I looked directly into the nearest lens, speaking as if to a single person who still believed in good endings. And then, in the second row, a woman stood, a face lined with time but lit with something gentler. "I'm Grace Park," she said. "Michael and I were close once. Thank you for saying his name." I reached down, took her hands. "Help me build this right," I said. She nodded. "I will." Behind her, Randall Pike watched, recalculating his formulas, realizing the math of conscience had changed its currency. The memorial was held the next afternoon, and the hall looked like it was trying too hard to stay composed white lilies, dark suits, whispers that moved like wind through a field of guilt, employees in black, politicians in blue, family in absence. On stage stood a framed photograph of Michael Whitmore, his smile frozen in a year that hadn't learned forgiveness yet. Beside it, a motorcycle helmet gleamed under the lights, polished like prayer. I stood backstage with Harper and Grace, both silent, both bracing for whatever version of me would step forward. When Harper called my name, the crowd fell into the kind of quiet that feels like judgment. I walked toward the lectern with a pulse so loud I thought it might interfere with the microphones. 32 years ago, I began. A terrible thing happened in the rain. It stole a son and scattered a future. I can't return what was taken, but I can tell you what I will do with what was given. My voice shook once, then steadied. I told them about the Whitmore Second Chances Trust, $1.5 billion to help those who never got the luxury of a redo. I spoke of driver education, therapy grants, scholarships for first responders, and restorative justice programs where victims could meet offenders if forgiveness ever wanted to try. When I finished, Randall Pike rose from his seat, his expression groomed for television. "Shareholders have a right to know," he said, his voice amplified and immaculate. "Will Miss Moore's choices destabilize this company's value?" I met his gaze. "I don't intend to destabilize anything," I said. "I intend to humanize it. Profit without conscience is vandalism of meaning. I won't be party to that." A murmur swept the crowd like an aftershock. And then, from somewhere in the second row, a man stood up mid-50s, gray hair, no notes in his hand. "I lost my wife in a hit and run," he said quietly. "If this fund means fewer of us stand up to say that, then I don't care who inherited what." That was the moment the room changed. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something adjacent, like a door unlocking from the inside. Randall sat down, calculating silence. Afterward, in a smaller room that smelled like cedar and closure, Harper handed me an envelope, smaller than the one that had started all of this. "Ethan's final note," she said. "He asked that it be opened after the memorial." My hands shook as I tore it open. "Claire," it began. "If the room is full, some came for me and some came to see if you'd fail. Remember, this what you carry isn't money, it's permission. For people to forgive themselves. For truth to walk in daylight. For grief to make something that wasn't there before. When my son died, I thought forgiveness would make the loss smaller. I was wrong. Forgiveness makes you larger. That's all it does." I read it aloud. By the end, the room had new weather, heavy, cleansing, alive. Later. I found a quiet corner near a window streaked with late afternoon rain and dialed a number I'd been afraid of. It rang twice. "Claire Moore," came the voice, aged and sour. "Heard you're rich." "Daryl Keene," I said evenly. "I'm funded by a man your choices helped bury. I'm opening a restorative program. If you're capable of the truth, you can speak it there to the people who deserve to hear it." He laughed, that same ugly sound that had probably followed him through decades of bars. "Statutes ran out, sweetheart. Truth's for suckers." "Not anymore," I said and hung up with some doors. I realized you close so the house can finally be a home. Backstage. Mom stood with Grace, their hands clasped, their faces wet but unashamed. I walked toward them, feeling smaller and larger all at once. "I don't know if I deserve this," I whispered. Grace squeezed my hand. "Deserve is a past tense verb," she said. "Build is present tense." Mom touched my cheek. "I don't know how to live with what I did." "You live by doing," I told her. "Every day. Something that makes the world look a little less like that night." She nodded slowly, the kind of nod that means a new chapter is starting, even if the last one never really ended. "Then let's start tonight." We signed the documents that evening, in a conference room bathed in the soft light of forgiveness and fatigue. The Whitmore Second Chances Trust launched with $1.6 billion, and we added more later. Grace became co-chair, her name right beside mine. Mom's appeared in smaller print at the bottom, where penance belongs not erased, but recorded. Randall Pike eventually learned how to make peace with ethics once investors realized that conscience had become profitable. "Apparently, integrity improves market confidence," Harper said once, with a small smile. "I kept my apartment, I kept my storage unit too, though only long enough to donate the last piece of my past, a stainless steel table, to a community kitchen called Michael's Place. Teens learned to cook there, and to handle sharp knives with respect. I still work a shift a week at the diner. Darla refuses to let me pay for coffee. You make me rich in novelty, she says, sliding pancakes my way like communion. One Thursday, a woman sat in booth 5, apron folded in her lap like surrender. She'd lost a bakery. Same story. Different storm. She cried into her tea, and I listened. When she left, I pressed a card into her hand. Whitmore Second Chances, embossed in quiet letters. Call this number, I told her. They're good people. Outside, rain began again, soft this time, like the sky had learned to speak gently. I looked up and thought of Ethan, of what he lost, and what he built through me. I couldn't return his son, or erase my mother's terror, but I could make sure money was never a monument, only a bridge. Avery sent a photo later that week, Mom standing before a small class, teaching safe driving, her hands calm, her voice steady. Beneath it, Avery had written, "Building is present tense." In my wallet, next to a faded photo of me and Avery at the lake, I keep Ethan's letter. The crease is worn. The ink hasn't faded. Forgiveness hasn't made the loss smaller. It's made us larger, large enough to carry the weight properly and to give it away when someone else needs it. If you believe in second chances, in truth, that doesn't hide behind fear. Share this story. Leave a comment. Let me know what forgiveness means to you. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it helps these stories reach the hearts that need them most.